Okay, welcome to this deep dive. Today we're unpacking quite a stack of sources focused on the ever-changing landscape of cybersecurity. We're pulling insights from CERT-SE's weekly roundup and other key reports you've shared with us. Our mission really is to guide you through the noise and highlight what's truly important. We're talking major international takedowns, disruptive ransomware attacks, critical guidance on securing everything from old laptops to, well, assets orbiting the Earth. Think of this as your shortcut to being well-informed about the digital frontier right now.
Exactly. We'll look at the trends, the specific threats, and crucially, the advice emerging from the front lines, helping you understand not just what's happening, but, why it's significant for organizations and individuals navigating this digital world.
Okay, let's unpack this, and actually let's start with some encouraging news. It seems law enforcement is striking back on the international front. Europol announced another significant phase of Operation ENDGAME.
Yes, Endgame. This is a big one. It's specifically targeting that crime-as-a-service ecosystem. Between May 19 and 22nd, authorities took down around 300 servers worldwide, neutralized 650 domains, issued international arrest warrants for 20 individuals, and seized EUR 3.5 million in crypto just in this phase.
Wow, and that brings the total for the operation to over 21 million euros, right?
That's right, over 21 million. But what's particularly effective about Endgame is its target, initial access malware, or IAM. These aren't the final payloads like ransomware. They're the tools criminals use to first sneak into systems. Things like Bumblebee, Quackbot, TrickBot, names you might recognize.
Right, so hitting the entry point.
Exactly. By hitting that IAM infrastructure, law enforcement is cutting off that initial access. It disrupts the entire chain before major damage can even occur. It really shows law enforcement adapting their strategy, countering the criminal supply chain.
That makes sense. And there was another coordinated effort, too, with infostealer.
Yes, Europol collaborating with Microsoft this time. They went after Lumma, also known as Lumma C2. It's described as one of the world's largest infostealers. Basically, malware as a service.
So other criminals rented out.
Precisely. To steal things like browser credentials, crypto wallets, documents. Pretty nasty stuff.
And Microsoft's role was mapping the infrastructure.
Correct. Their digital crimes unit helped map it out, which led to the takedown or blocking of approximately 2,300 malicious domains.
2,300, that's a huge number.
It is. Taking down a widespread service like Lumma C2 is a significant blow to that underground economy. And it really highlights how effective it can be when you get public-private collaboration like this. Law enforcement and big tech working together.
Definitely significant wins. Good to see that focused action can work. But as you said, the threat activity remains incredibly high. We're seeing major impacts across different sectors.
Unfortunately, yes.
Like in the UK, the legal aid agency confirmed a major data breach. It happened via a cyber attack on their portal end of April. And what's concerning here isn't just the scale, hundreds of thousands of people affected, but the sensitivity of the data. We're talking financial details, criminal history, even data on domestic abuse victims. And some of it dates back to 2010.
That longevity is really worrying. It just underscores the immense responsibility organizations have with sensitive PII, personal identifiable information. The fact that data from over a decade ago could potentially be exposed really highlights that long-term security burden, doesn't it?
It really does. And we also saw attacks disrupting physical operations, particularly in food and beverage.
Right. Arla Foods in Germany had production halted at a facility, caused delays.
And in the UK, a logistics firm, Peter Green, chilled. They supply major supermarkets, Tesco, Sainsbury's, Aldi, hit by ransomware.
Yeah, and connecting those dots, it shows how these cyber attacks ripple through critical supply chains. Disrupting a company handling chilled food, that can mean actual food waste or, empty shelves, real-world consequences.
Definitely hits home. Then there were these allegations regarding Coca-Cola.
Yes, the claims. Important to stress these were claims at the time the source material was written.
Right. The ever-attacking group claimed a breach of Middle East operations, alleging 23 million Salesforce records were taken. And then another group, Gehenna, claimed a similar theft from Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific partners, also millions of CRM records.
And neither company had confirmed. But the allegations themselves are significant. It shows attackers targeting valuable customer relationship management data, potentially on a massive scale. We have to report it impartially, as the source does, acknowledging the claims without verifying them ourselves.
Understood. And shifting to critical infrastructure more broadly, that oil and gas sector report was quite stark.
It really was. Over 50% of the top 400 firms hit by breaches in just the last 30 days.
And 94% having suffered at least one breach historically.
Which is staggering. And nearly 70% fell into high-risk categories for readiness.
With basic weaknesses, right? Poor credential hygiene, unpatched software.
Exactly. Foundational stuff. It's a stark reminder of the systemic risks in critical infrastructure. These weaknesses are unfortunately common, but incredibly dangerous when they provide footholds into sectors vital to, well, everything.
Okay, but on a slightly more positive note, showing the other side of the coin, the ethical hacking community was busy.
Yeah.
Can to own Berlin 2025.
Yes. The good guys finding the flaws first.
Over $1 million earned, 28 zero days found. Across operating systems, AI products, containers, browsers, virtualization.
It highlights the value of these events, demonstrates the ingenuity of researchers, and crucially, helps vendors fix flaws before the bad guys find them.
And they had a first this year, right? With AI and VMware.
They did. First dedicated AI category, with $140 awarded for AI hacks, and Starlabs SG pulled off the first VMware ESXi hypervisor hack in Pwn2Own history.
That sounds significant.
It is. Given how critical virtualization is in almost every modern data center, finding and fixing flaws there is a very big deal.
Okay. Now, stepping into the geopolitical realm, the sources pointed to ongoing state-sponsored activity.
Yes, specifically a campaign linked to Russian intelligence, APT-28, or Fancy Bear, linked to the GRU military intelligence.
Exposed by the UK's NCSC and allies.
Right. US, Canada, Australia, EU countries involved in the advisory.
And they've been targeting Western logistics and tech companies, the ones supporting aid to Ukraine.
Since early 2022, yes. Using tactics like credential guessing, spear phishing, exploiting vulnerabilities, especially in VPNs and SA host devices, and deploying specific malware like Headlace and Maceby.
And they even mentioned targeting IP cameras at border crossings.
Correct. Likely trying to track aid movements. It clearly shows cyber espionage directly supporting geopolitical and potentially military objectives, specifically trying to gain intelligence on or perhaps disrupt aid flowing into Ukraine.
And again, we're reporting this impartially as presented in the source material, which attributes the activity.
Precisely. And reflecting this growing concern about digital espionage, there was that new law in the Netherlands.
Right, criminalizing a broader range of activities.
Exactly. Moving beyond just classified state secrets to include sensitive, unclassified information, and also targeting actions taken for a foreign government that harm Dutch interests. It comes with increased penalties, too, up to 8 years for some computer offenses.
So governments are adapting their legal tools.
It shows that. Adapting laws to address the pervasive nature of modern digital espionage, a hardening of the legal landscape.
Okay, now let's take that deeper dive into ransomware. Still a dominant threat and always evolving.
Always.
There was a really powerful case study from the UK. The BBC reported on the 2020 attack against Redcar and Cleveland Council.
Ah, yes. Linked to the Conti Group, wasn't it?
It was. They described it as total destruction of their IT systems. It crippled essential public services, bin collections, social care.
Just devastating.
They lost the ability to share information with the police, the NHS. They had to revert to pen and paper.
Imagine that. Running council services on pen and paper in this day and age?
And they cost $11.3 million uninsured. They had to use their reserves.
Wow.
And it took 10 months to restore systems. The former leader chose not to pay the ransom, but the recovery cost was still immense.
That's such a powerful example of the real-world human and financial cost of ransomware, especially on public services. It goes way beyond just data theft.
Absolutely. And the industrial sector is still getting hit hard, too.
Yes. The Dragos Q1 2025 analysis showed an increase. 708 incidents impacting industrial entities globally just in that first quarter.
Manufacturing taking the brunt.
By far, 68% of attacks. North America saw the highest volume, especially the U.S., but Europe and Asia were significant, too.
And any particular group standing out?
Well, Clarabee was exceptionally active, about 22% of incidents, largely exploiting that MOVEit vulnerability, a supply chain issue again. Akira and Ransom Hub were also prominent.
And the tactics are evolving there, too.
Yes. Dragos highlighted attackers using 0 days, AI-enhanced phishing, which is concerning, makes social engineering potentially much more effective, abusing remote access, and targeting those ESXi hypervisors we mentioned earlier.
So the risk to operational technology, the systems controlling physical processes, remains critical.
Absolutely critical. That AI-enhanced phishing trend is one to watch closely.
Now, healthcare. This sector seems under immense pressure.
It really is. Health ISAC reporting ransomware is still the #1 threat for 2025, just as it was in 2024.
But there's a new tactic emerging that sounds particularly nasty: patient extortion.
Yes. This is, frankly, disturbing. After stealing patient data, attackers are contacting patients directly and demanding money. The source mentioned an Integris Health example where they demanded $50 per patient.
That's incredibly cruel.
It is. It's a cruel escalation. It shows attackers adapting, moving beyond just double extortion, stealing data and encrypting sometimes, to pure data theft, and then direct monetization by preying on vulnerable individuals.
Why is healthcare such a target? Is the data just that valuable?
Extremely valuable. Sensitive health information, personal details. Plus, the pressure on healthcare providers to restore services quickly is immense, which attackers exploit. This patient extortion tactic is a way to monetize even if the organization restores from backups or refuses to pay. It's finding new ways to squeeze victims.
And we saw major incidents continuing too. Change Healthcare, Ascension.
Yes, Change Healthcare, attributed to Black Cattle PHV, caused widespread payment disruption across the U.S. healthcare system. Huge impact. And Ascension Healthcare, hit by Black Basta, affecting hospitals and senior care facilities.
Forescout analysis also pointed to ransomware being the most common cause of healthcare breaches last year.
Over 700 breaches, more than 90% in the U.S. And the trend for this year: 56% of breaches are compromising network server data, meaning deep access.
So they're getting deep inside the networks. Any particular ransomware groups active?
Numerically, Lockbit 3.0 is still very active, according to the sources. Others, like Bionlian, too. And nation-states, Russia and North Korea mentioned, are also targeting the sector. And tactics are evolving, like groups such as Hunters International, believed to be a rebrand of the Hive operations remnants, focusing purely on data theft and extortion, sometimes skipping encryption altogether.
Adapting to defenses like backups, perhaps.
Exactly. If organizations are getting better at backing up, pure data theft and extortion still provides leverage.
And the tools are evolving too. Skitnet or BossNet?
Yes, a newer multi-stage malware, used by groups like Black Basta and Cactus. It's written partly in Rust, partly in NIM, designed for stealthy post-exploitation.
What can it do?
Data theft, remote access. It uses DNS for command and control, which can be harder to detect. Persistence, screenshot capture. It stealthily installs legitimate tools like AnyDesk for access and has AV evasion built in.
And it's available as malware as a service.
Since April 2024, apparently with increased use noted early this year, that MAS model lowers the barrier to entry for less sophisticated groups to use advanced tools.
And that DNS for C2, command and control, that's significant.
It is. DNS traffic translating website names to IP addresses is fundamental to the internet and often less scrutinized than regular web traffic. So hiding malicious communications there makes detection harder, shows attackers leveraging more advanced techniques.
Attackers are also getting creative with social engineering, like these fake CAPTCHA attacks.
Right. Trend Micro reported on this. Users see what looks like a normal CAPTCHA verification page.
The prove you're human thing.
Exactly. But they're tricked into copying a piece of text and pasting it into their Windows Run dialog box.
And that text is actually a malicious command.
Precisely. JavaScript or PowerShell usually. It executes when pasted into Run. The payloads are often infostealers like Lumma or Rhadamanthes, or remote access Trojans like Asyncrat.
Delivered how? Phishing.
Phishing, malvertising, SEO poisoning. And they often abuse legitimate platforms like file-sharing sites to host parts of the attack chain.
So it leverages user trust in KPTCHAs and tricks them into using a legitimate system feature dangerously.
Exactly. Most users don't realize pasting random stuff into the Run dialog can execute code. It's a clever exploitation of trust and system functionality.
Another tricky one involved the software supply chain, an O365 phishing attack using a malicious NPM package.
Yes, Fortran detailed this. It started with an email HTML attachment. Used AES encryption, which is more advanced than simple obfuscation, to hide code pointing to JavaScript hosted on the JSDeller CDN.
A trusted CDN, right?
Yes. And that malicious JavaScript came from an NPM package called CityCar8. It personalized the phishing links with the victim's email address to make them look more convincing, aiming to harvest Microsoft O365 credentials.
So weaponizing developer tools like NPM and trusted CDNs, that's a worrying vector.
It is. By hiding within legitimate ecosystems, attacks can bypass some security filters and gain an air of legitimacy, a classic supply chain risk.
Sometimes, though, the vulnerability isn't sophisticated malware, but just forgotten things, like this DNS hijacking actor, Hazy Hawk.
Right. Infoblox reported on this actor. They specialize in finding and hijacking abandoned cloud resources. Think old S3 buckets, Azure endpoints that belong to high-profile organizations, government, universities, corporations.
How do they hijack them?
By exploiting dangling or misconfigured DNS CNME records. If an organization removes a service but forgets to update the DNS record pointing to it, someone else can sometimes claim that underlying cloud resource.
And then use the original organization's domain reputation.
Exactly. It's reputational hijacking. They leverage the legitimate parent domain's good reputation to host URLs for scams or malware, often via traffic distribution systems.
So it all comes back to good housekeeping, even in the cloud. DNS hygiene is critical.
Absolutely. Forgotten assets become dangerous liabilities, which ties into the guidance on decommissioning we'll likely get to later.
Okay. And this idea of data being the core commodity, shoplifting 2.0.
Yeah, that was a SANS blog summary via FTI Cybersecurity. Data is the valuable commodity attackers are after. It highlighted groups like Scattered Spider, known for sophisticated social engineering, phishing, impersonation, SIM swapping, just to get initial access.
And Dragon Force.
Evolved from hacktivism to financially motivated ransomware as a service. Interestingly, using leaked source code from groups like Lockbit 3.0 and Conti.
And are they collaborating?
The report suggested a potential division of labor. Scattered Spider excels at gaining access through social engineering, then potentially hands off to a group like Dragon Force to deploy the ransomware for encryption and extortion.
So specialization within cybercrime.
Precisely. A division of labor, and the availability of leaked ransomware code lowers the barrier for groups to launch sophisticated attacks.
Okay, so with all these threats swirling around, ransomware, espionage, supply chain attacks, social engineering, what can actually be done? The sources offered some practical advice.
Yes, moving towards bolstering defenses.
Starting with that point about forgotten assets. The UK's NCSC issued guidance on decommissioning digital assets.
Timely advice. Old data, software, hardware, if it's outdated or unsupported, it's a liability.
They stressed planning for decommissioning right from the procurement stage.
Which makes sense. The plan should include discovering all assets, including that shadow IT people set up. Comprehensive backup and archiving, yes, but also secure sanitization of storage before disposal.
And this connects directly back to Hazy Hawk, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Incomplete decommissioning, forgetting to remove old DNS records or properly wipe storage. That's precisely why things like dangling DNS records or abandoned cloud resources exist for attackers to exploit. It often gets neglected because it can be complex or seem costly, but it's crucial hygiene.
Then there was specific advice for operational technology and industrial control systems from Norway's NSM.
Right, urging businesses, especially those with Otis, to improve security due to observed activity targeting critical infrastructure like water utilities and dams.
What were their key recommendations?
Good logging specifically for OT's networks, which can differ from IT logging. Avoid direct internet remote access to these critical systems. Definitely segment IT and OT networks. Update any internet-exposed interfaces promptly. Disable unnecessary functions. Use strong multi-factor authentication, preferably phishing-resistant like FIDO2 or biometrics. And importantly, practice incident handling for OT scenarios.
That segmentation point seems key, keeping the office network separate from the factory floor controls.
It's vital. It's a fundamental control to prevent, say, a standard email phishing attack on the IT network from spreading laterally and compromising the systems that control physical processes. That could be catastrophic.
We also got some perspective from someone who's been through a major incident. Tim Brown, the CISO of SolarWinds, reflecting on Sunburst.
Yes, some valuable lessons learned there.
He really emphasized transparency during the breach. He felt it was crucial for maintaining trust and actually helped SolarWinds retain 97% of their customers afterwards.
That's a powerful point about the long-term value of transparency, even when it's difficult.
He also advised bringing in external help immediately and focusing relentlessly on protecting customers.
Standard incident response best practice, but good reinforcement.
And he had some crucial personal advice for fellow CISOs.
Which was?
Proactively discuss liability. Ensure the company has clear legal and financial support structures in place before a major incident happens, given the increasing personal risks CISOs face.
That's highly relevant advice in today's climate where security leaders are increasingly under scrutiny after breaches. Planning for that personal support is critical.
But are organizations, especially smaller ones, getting the message on basic security? A Swedish survey suggests maybe not.
The awareness gap. Yes. An insurance company survey found that while 28% of small businesses see cybercrime as a major threat,
only half have actually strengthened their IT security in the last 2 years.
And the really worrying stat, Only 4% had trained their staff in cybersecurity.
4%.
It's disturbingly low. This awareness action gap is a huge vulnerability. SMBs are often targeted precisely because they might have weaker defenses, and they can be entry points into larger supply chains. The fact that an insurance company is highlighting this shows their growing concern about underwriting this risk.
And the risks aren't just confined to traditional IT networks. The U.S. Coast Guard warned about increasing maritime cyber risks.
Right. On ships themselves. The traditional air gap, keeping ship systems physically separate from the internet, is eroding due to satellite broadband and cloud connectivity.
So vessels are becoming more vulnerable to attacks originating from shore-based IT systems.
Potentially, yes. They specifically flagged concerns about ZPMC ship-to-shore cranes.
The big cranes you see in ports.
Exactly. They're made by a Chinese state-owned company, and the concern revolves around potential security gaps, things like running outdated operating systems or having problematic remote access clauses built into contracts.
So supply chain risk in massive hardware.
Yes, complex and significant. The advice was for terminal operators to minimize remote access granted to crane manufacturers and scrutinize those contracts very carefully. It really shows cybersecurity risks extending deep into physical transportation infrastructure.
Even highly resourced sectors feel the pressure. The HSBC UK CEO was quoted saying, "The cyber attack threat keeps me awake at night."
Ian Stewart. And he mentioned banks spending hundreds of millions on IT security.
Yet, reports indicated the 9 major UK banks suffered over 800 hours of tech outages in the last 2 years.
Now, not all of those would be cyber attacks, could be IT failures too, but it highlights the fragility and the immense stress even well-funded sectors are under. Outages, regardless of the cause, impact customer trust and operations significantly. You can see why it keeps leaders up at night.
On a collaborative note, Moldova gained access to the EU cybersecurity reserve.
Yes, signing an agreement for access to the EU's rapid response mechanism. That gives them specialized teams and resources if they face a major attack. It reflects that broader trend towards collective security and international cooperation in cyberspace, recognizing that big threats often need cross-border responses.
And finally, in terms of managing the sheer volume of vulnerabilities, there's a proposal from NIST and CISA in the U.S. for a new metric.
Right. The Vulnerability Exploitation Probability metric.
Yep.
The goal is to create a standardized way to predict which known vulnerabilities are most likely to actually be exploited by attackers.
To help prioritize patching.
Exactly. Organizations face thousands of vulnerabilities. They can't patch everything instantly. CVSS scores help, but they don't always predict real-world exploitation. A better data-driven prioritization method could significantly improve patching efficiency and reduce overall risk by focusing resources where they're needed most.
Makes sense. And alongside these strategic efforts, the usual stream of specific critical vulnerabilities continues. CERT-SE flagged issues this week, too.
Yes. A severe one in Bind DNS software, CVE 2025-4075, that could make servers inaccessible, and serious vulnerabilities in Cisco Identity Services Engine, ISE, and Unified Intelligence Center, UIC.
So as always, prompt patching where possible is crucial.
Absolutely. These alerts are constant reminders of the need for ongoing vigilance, even with widely used foundational infrastructure software and network devices.
Okay, let's shift focus now to quite literally a new frontier space. Cybersecurity is becoming critical there, too.
It really is. The global space economy is booming, projected to grow from around $630 billion last year to $1.8 trillion by 2035.
Wow.
But as space operations become more digital, more interconnected, relying on software and networks, they inherit all those cyber risks, plus some unique ones.
And we've seen incidents already, right?
We have. In March 2025, Poland's space agency, Polsat, had to disconnect its network to contain a breach. And back in 2022, there was that major Viasat-KSAT attack. Attributed often to Russia, it disabled tens of thousands of satellite modems across Europe. It significantly disrupted communications, notably impacting Ukraine early in the conflict.
So what makes securing space assets so different, so challenging?
Several things. First, the satellites are physically out of reach. Remote patching or responding to an incident is hampered by latency, distance. You can't just walk over to the server rack.
Right.
Second, legacy systems. Satellites often have 10 to 20-year life cycles. They might be running outdated hardware and software that wasn't designed for today's threats and has limited power for modern security measures.
Hard to update things designed 15 years ago for today's threats.
Exactly. Third, it's a fragmented landscape. Lots of different operators, varying regulations across countries, complex supply chains, often using commercial off-the-shelf COX components. ENISA, the EU cybersecurity agency, also flags these CERT-SE supply chain risks.
So a vulnerability in one common component could affect many different systems.
Potentially, yes. And it highlights how critical satellite infrastructure is becoming for communications, navigation like GPS, weather forecasting, intelligence gathering. They're increasingly vital and thus increasingly attractive targets.
But there's growing recognition of the problem.
Definitely. The EU's NIS2 directive, for instance, explicitly recognizes the space sector as an essential entity starting January 2025. That means stricter security requirements.
And technology might help. AI, blockchain.
Experts are discussing the role of emerging tech. AI assisting human operators, human on the loop, rather than fully autonomous, securing the new generation of software-defined satellites, maybe blockchain for supply chain integrity, and looking ahead to both the threats and benefits of quantum computing. The key takeaway is that the old idea of security by obscurity, thinking space assets were safe just because they were remote and specialized, that's completely over.
So security needs to be baked in from the start.
It has to be. NIS2 is a big step showing regulatory focus. Security needs to be by design, built into the architecture of space systems from day one, not bolted on later.
Okay, well, this deep dive certainly covered a lot of ground this week, from terrestrial networks all the way up to orbit. The key themes really seem to stand out. We see law enforcement making real efforts, achieving significant wins, disrupting the cybercrime ecosystem, especially initial access and infostealers. But the ransomware threat remains incredibly persistent, constantly evolving with horrible tactics like patient extortion and hitting critical sectors like healthcare and industrial systems really hard.
And it's just abundantly clear, isn't it, that foundational security hygiene is more vital than ever. Things like secure decommissioning of old assets, really tackling supply chain risks in both software and hardware, properly segmenting critical networks like IT and OT, and crucially, investing in training people. We also see geopolitical tensions continuing to drive sophisticated state-sponsored cyber activity, and now cybersecurity risks are rapidly emerging and presenting unique challenges in entirely new, complex domains like securing assets operating in space.
It really underscores that continuous vigilance, collaboration like those public-private partnerships, and just a fundamental commitment to security best practices are truly our best defense in this incredibly dynamic and expanding landscape.
Well said.
For more details on many of the topics we discussed today, you can find the CERT-SE weekly newsletter online at CERT.SE. The latest issue covering much of this is Vekabrev V.21. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Considering how quickly these cyber risks are emerging in complex, hard-to-reach environments like space, and how utterly dependent we're becoming on these systems for everyday life, does this force us to fundamentally rethink how we design security itself? Moving beyond just protecting traditional network perimeters to a model where maybe every single component, everywhere, from a sensor on Earth to a satellite in orbit, must be inherently secure by design from the very beginning.